Well, first of all, I want to thank everyone. Thank you all so much for being here with us today. My name is Erica McKibben. I am a state captain with Right to Health Action here in Georgia. Right to Health Action is a grassroots movement dedicated to fighting for health equity. As we enter the third year of this pandemic on March the 11th, political leaders want us to get back to normal, but the number of lives lost to COVID-19 continues to explode. Last Friday, there were more deaths from COVID than Hurricane Katrina. More died in 48 hours than did on 9/11. And for every person we've lost, there are 9 more left behind. That's 9 million Americans who will not go back to normal, and tens of millions more who are elderly or immunocompromised. This new normal is a lot like an old normal, except now we know who will die and who will be homebound and left behind. We now know that pandemics will coming faster and getting worse until we tackle the climate-related drivers of disease spillover. The Senate this week must vote on a 5-month overdue budget. 36 senators saw fit last week to hold new COVID relief hostage against previous COVID relief they've already voted for. That's a no lesson learned move, if ever that was, especially as new variants are making their way into the US. A subvariant that this week sees Hong Kong on lockdown with overflowing hospitals and morgues. As you all know, this is a very week, very historic, unfortunate week coming up. The week started with the world passing of 6 million deaths due to COVID-19. By the end of the month, our country will have passed 1 million COVID deaths in America. In the next few days ahead, Congress is poised to pass the budget for fiscal year 2022. Their deadline is March the 11th, the same day that is the grim second anniversary of WHO's determination of COVID-19 as a global pandemic, the day that changed everything. Right to Health with our partners marked by COVID-19 Lone Harlots Outreach, and COVID-19 Loss Support for Family and Friends have organized this press conference and virtual protest to share our human stories of loss and anger and to demand action this week from Congress to vaccinate the world. This week's upcoming vote must include at least $17 billion in emergency funds for global vaccinations, more than triple the inadequate requests from the Biden administration. We are also demanding that Congress fulfill the full $1.1 billion pledge for the historic global fund to prevent pandemics made by Vice President Harris at last September's White House Global COVID Summit. We are $850 million short of that pledge and need Congress to fill the gap. We are also here today to let Congress know that millions of people cannot go back to normal. We will remember their votes and will be holding our elected officials accountable during the midterms. We will be showing up at town hall meetings, candidate forums to put politicians and candidates on spot with our stories and demanding answers to our questions and policy demands. We need action now from Congress. We are watching. Thank you all for being here today to hear our calls and amplify our message. And I just want to make a quick note on technology for today. So all attendees will be muted during the event. If you have to leave the meeting at any point or get kicked out and want to rejoin, simply use the same link you originally joined with. You can submit any questions via the chat at any time. We will refer to these questions during our Q&A time at the end. We are also requesting this event to be shared with those who couldn't be here today. Members of the press on the Zoom link can raise their hands to verbally ask questions. We will get the Q&A after the last speaker. You can also ask questions in the chat box, and we will endeavor to answer any technical policy questions in the chat right away. So get us started today. We are joined by some of the foremost leaders of the COVID Army. So we will now start with, and I want to introduce Dr. Talika Singh. Talika is a virologists and vaccine scientists, as well as one of our R2H action team members since 2020, when she began fighting alongside us for the pandemic prevention policies after losing her grandmother to COVID-19.
Thanks, Erica. I'll go ahead and I'll share my story. So today, I want to share about my grandmother. So you all know why we need to act now to make vaccines globally available. My grandmother raised me. She was just so loving. No matter what mood you're in, my grandmother could always make it better. In every photo, she's smiling, and in every video she was singing. She was just this bright light holding our family together. Thinking back, I'm just so sad that she, even when she was at the hospital with COVID-19, she even sang to the nurses at the hospital with her oxygen mask on. That is the kind of bright light that my grandmother is. Can you believe that? In mid-October 2020, my grandmother's oxygen levels dropped to very dangerous levels. She was taken to a hospital in Mumbai where she tested positive for COVID. From there, she was swept off to a hospital for COVID patients only and separated from our family. She was sick, she was confused, and alone in a place where she could not even speak the language. For 19 agonizing days, we waited for every message from the hospital. The lack of information from an overrun hospital during a pandemic stressed us out. She did not deserve this. Why couldn't we be with her when she raised all of us? And yet, day by day, her conditions deteriorated until she was eventually put on the ventilator. She was barely conscious. She had a feeding tube in her nose. Machines poked and prodded her soft arms. The doctors gave her more life-supporting interventions. And despite all this, on October 23rd, 2020, my grandmother died alone in a hospital in India of COVID-19. I remember that big hug, and I can still hear her singing in my head. And she is never coming back. And now, more than a year later, I still feel out of breath thinking about these final moments because she could not breathe. I know that there are people out there who are not able to be there for our loved ones in their last moments because of this virus. We don't want to keep living this nightmare over and over again. We want to be able to protect our families. There are literally billions of impoverished people waiting in line for years while this virus keeps mutating. And without sufficient vaccines last year, India saw the highest surge of cases in one day, more than 300,000 cases in a single day. And these are not just numbers. These are people's grandparents, brothers, sisters, cousins. These are the people that we love. We simply cannot afford to delay life-saving vaccines and allow this virus to take more lives. I want to highlight that last week's short-sighted objections by our senators, 36 senators, threaten the safety of our family with relentless new viral variants. Well, we know that this pandemic is not over anywhere until it is over everywhere. So I'm calling on Congress to do what Biden has already promised to do, to help vaccinate the world. And that means allocating $17 billion to help vaccinate at least 70% of the world by this September. Congress, I will not accept business as usual because business as usual does not come to terms with the reality of our lives and our families' deaths. This is not the moment to be penny pinching. This is the moment to be brave and actually solve this global issue. We must also get smarter and do better than expensive charitable acts. The public paid to invent these vaccines. And now the public is paying twice with this preventable and prolonged pandemic, while private monopoly barriers on public research create massive supply bottlenecks. That's not okay. The Biden administration must move beyond charity, which we already know does not work. And we are asking for two things. First, invoke the Defense Production Act and allow DARPA to share the recipes of the vaccines and know-how with local producers around the world. And second is to build up local manufacturing worldwide. Until we replace these barriers worldwide with capacity building and solidarity, we will face wave after wave of viral variants. And meanwhile, new and more deadly pandemics can emerge. I want to let Congress know that we are watching the vote in the days that are coming ahead. We will remember how members vote on the 17 billion we need to vaccinate the world. And during the midterms, we will organize the millions of Americans who also lost loved ones to hold members of Congress accountable. We will not forget. And in fact, I cannot forget. My grandmother is not coming back. Today would have been her birthday if she was still with us. I will not forget, and I'm still here fighting to protect my family.
Thank you for sharing, Talika. We are so sorry for your loss and grateful to be organizing alongside you in this crucial fight to protect the future of our loved ones. Next up, I would like to introduce Sabila Khan from New Jersey, who founded an online support group for families of those who lost their loved ones from COVID-19. She did this just days after losing her own father.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sabila Khan, and I am one of the millions of Americans who have lost a loved one to COVID. My Abu, Shafkat Rasul Khan, was a loving father of 3, the doting grandfather of 7, and a devoted husband to my mother for 49 years. He died 6 months before their 50th wedding anniversary. As a community activist in Jersey City, he spent years carving out spaces and opportunities for others. He was a good human being who devoted himself to his family and his community. On March 11th, 2020, as the tri-state area started to go into lockdown, the rehab facility where Abu was receiving physical therapy for his Parkinson's disease closed its doors to visitors. We never saw him again. After a week of growing increasingly alarmed when he stopped answering his phone, we were told that Abu was congested, had lost his appetite and his ability to speak, and had a low-grade fever. He was rushed to a hospital 3 blocks away from us, where he spent 3 days in a war zone of an ER waiting for a hospital bed. He died alone, without his family by his side, 4 days later on Tuesday, April 14th. Almost 2 years later, and it still takes my breath away to imagine the fear, isolation, and trauma that Abu suffered during the last week of his life. It's something that will haunt me for the rest of mine. Abu was buried the following day, and in what was the most surreal and heartbreaking moment of my life, I had to watch his burial live streamed on my phone. But sadly, my story is not unique. When Abu died in April 2020, the COVID death toll in the US was 26,000. Almost 2 years later, we've surpassed 960,000 deaths. For every COVID death, there's an estimated 9 close family members left behind. That's almost 9 million people in America left with PTSD, feelings of guilt and anxiety, lack of closure, and the burden of knowing that their loved ones died traumatized, isolated, alone. No family deserves this. Mine certainly didn't, and neither did the millions that came after us. In trying to navigate my own trauma, I took the lessons I learned from my community activist father, and 4 days after he died, I co-founded COVID-19 Loss Support for Family and Friends, the first Facebook bereavement group for people dealing with COVID loss. We're now the largest COVID loss support group in the world, with 14,000 members from all 50 states and from around the globe, who have lost parents and grandparents, spouses and children, siblings and aunts and uncles. A shocking number, myself included, have lost more than one loved one to this virus. I want to add something here. My family and I were undocumented for nearly a decade after arriving in the US in 1982. Abu was obsessed with American politics. He studied the platforms of candidates in local and national elections, followed primaries and debates. He encouraged others to vote, even though he himself couldn't vote in a presidential election until 2000. He raised us to believe in the political process. I've been a diligent voter since turning 18 because I know how hard my family fought for this privilege. So it's devastating for me to say that for the first time ever, I don't want to vote in the midterms. In this political rush to reclaim normalcy, even as we continue to lose well over 1,000 people a day to COVID, both parties are looking the same to me. And neither side seems to give a damn about poor, elderly, and disabled people like my Abu. No one has my vote this fall. I am not voting until our government can show that they care about the marginalized communities that have been disproportionately impacted by COVID. The Biden administration has made promises on the global stage about investing to prevent future pandemics, about helping to vaccinate the world, and it is about time that we hold the White House and Congress accountable to those promises. When the first woman of color vice president made a historic pledge of $1.1 billion in seed funding at the White House Global COVID Summit last September, for a long overdue global fund to protect us from this nightmare from ever happening again, I was excited. Finally, we were going to do something long overdue. But when I see Congress clawing back previous COVID relief funds to pay for half measures instead of keeping these important promises, just completely dropping the vice president's pledge as if it never happened, it makes me feel sick to my stomach, like throwing up my hands. Me and my community will fight for the candidates who will keep their promises and really take action to stop COVID and transform our broken systems so this never happens again. This week, when 36 senators circulate a letter trying to filibuster global vaccines while new subvariants are overflowing morgues, I don't see anyone to get behind. I lost 3 more family members after my father was killed by this virus. None of this should have happened. We need real action, and we need it now. Thank you.
That actually got me there, Sabila. I really want to thank you for your honesty and thank you for sharing your story with us. I know I keep saying this, but we are really sorry for your family's loss and grateful for you and your activism and the support group as well. Next, we'll hear from Dr. Hannah Lixon. Hannah is an internist and pediatrician in Minneapolis, working on the front lines of the pandemic. She's a co-founder of the Minnesota Immigrant Health Alliance and works as a fierce advocate for her patients.
Thank you so much, and thanks for inviting me to join today. As you said, my name is Hannah Lixon. I'm a primary care doctor in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I've been caring for people with COVID for the past 2 years, and now I'm tired. I am so tired of this virus. I am tired of watching my patients die. I'm tired of holding space with my patients as they grieve for lost loved ones. And I'm tired of bearing witness to the pain and hardship of living with long COVID. I'm tired of fighting so hard to convince decision makers that the lives of my patients, of every child with a complex illness, every grandfather, every person, no matter how strong their immune system happens to be, matters. I'm tired of having to justify caring. 2 years have gone by and I haven't stopped caring, but I see so many politicians acting like everything's fine, minimizing and ignoring the truth that it's not. 2 years and our communities still do not have universal access to healthcare. 2 years and we don't have global access to vaccines or treatment. And that's the bare minimum that we should be asking for, because we haven't even taken the time to invest in the steps that will prevent this cycle from repeating itself all over again. And because the same systems and structures that allowed COVID to spread rapidly and hurt so many are all still here, this will all happen again. We need to be getting ready now for the next surge and guaranteeing access to care, investing globally in vaccine production and distribution, because we're not ready. In the past few months, I've seen patients suffer at home or waiting in the emergency room for days because some of the best hospitals in the world didn't have space, didn't have the care infrastructure that we needed to care for them. And that's because our health system has collapsed. We can't in the United States guarantee that people will get the care they need when they need it. And that's even for people with insurance who have access to care at baseline. Our healthcare infrastructure in this country has collapsed. And so we need to do everything possible to control the next surge, prevent the next surge and the next pandemic before it starts. Because right now we're not ready. What's happening in every corner of the world, every city, every community, every village and town affects us here. It affects us everywhere. Even right now, while we're being told in the US that we can ignore the pandemic, the BA2 variant is spreading through Hong Kong, killing thousands every day, overwhelming hospitals and morgues. And just today, cases and hospitalizations are on the rise again in Great Britain. We will continue to see new variants rise, and we know how fast they spread. This pandemic is not over anywhere until it's over everywhere. I still care, but I'm tired, and that's why I'm asking Congress to step up and help. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah, for all the work you are doing on the front lines and continue to do on the front lines, and for advocating for your patients as they struggle to navigate this awful pandemic. Next, we're going to hear from Jeanette Nunez del Prado. Jeanette was expecting her father to visit from Bolivia. He was hoping to secure his first vaccination when he died just days before his flight. Thank you for being here, Jeanette.
Thank you so much for having me. And I just want to honor all of my colleagues that came before me because we are exposing our broken hearts, reliving our trauma in order to help you all understand and put a face to these millions of numbers of deaths and the countless suffering. So thank you to them for serving as a model for me, and thank you to everyone who's here for listening. My name is Jeanette Nunez del Prado. I'm a licensed clinical social worker here in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I'm the hub leader of Marked by COVID. And I work with bilingual, bicultural, Spanish-speaking families that have been through significant trauma, on average 5 to 7 adverse childhood events, but nothing could have prepared me for the trauma of losing my father. So, and even to this day, I can't talk about it without crying. And I've learned to accept that that's okay. So thank you for your patience as I take some pauses from time and time again. So last year, I lost my dad, Hugo Nunez del Prado, to COVID-19 in May. He lived in Bolivia and he didn't have access to the vaccine, just like billions of others. One of the hardest things is that he died just 2 weeks before he was supposed to come to the US, get the vaccine, and meet my children, my 2-year-old and my 5-year-old, for the first time. We always thought we would have more time, and he almost made it. My dad was a very special person. He was only 62 years old. He left behind a wife of 26 years, 5 daughters, including myself. And he was strong and healthy with no pre-existing conditions. We were lied to when we were told that only elderly, only the infirm could die of this. I never thought this could happen. He was in his prime. Before COVID hit, he played tennis every day. He even ran a half marathon with my little sister. He loved to sing and dance. And when you were with him, it was always an adventure. And you never knew what was going to happen next. He was the life of the party. If we were walking together and he heard music playing in a shop or a car driving by with music, which happens a lot in Bolivia, he would just stop and start dancing and we would dance together. Such a fun person. And he was very loved, muy querido, from everyone. He didn't deserve to die so young. He deserved better. He deserved the vaccine. My dad owned his own business. He couldn't stay home. He and my stepmother contracted the virus at work. When he had to be hospitalized, the hospitals were completely overrun. He was lucky to get a bed. However, he received very poor medical care once admitted. The hospitals had no medication due to high drug prices, broken supply chains, and community shortages. The doctors could only write one prescription for his medication every day. So my little sisters, who are all in their 20s, would spend 10 hours every day searching for his COVID medicine at different pharmacies, waiting in line for hours. There were Facebook community groups that started helping people find pharmacies that had medicine. And these groups used to help people find the best empanadas or the most fun dance clubs. But this is what they turned into because they had to. When my dad was on a ventilator, there were some days that my sisters couldn't find his prescribed fentanyl and had to buy it on the black market. Those were some of the worst days. And this was a common practice in Bolivia, where access to healthcare is already very difficult. Drug companies monopolies keep prices too high to make it work. Wealthy country vaccine hoarding makes it impossible. My dad was a man who lived his life surrounded by people, surrounded by family, surrounded by love. But he died scared and alone without me there to hold his hand. And that will always haunt me. He deserved better. People like him in developing countries who already suffer so many inequities deserve better. There is no morally justifiable reason why the Western world is not widely sharing COVID vaccines with the global South. There are literally billions of people still waiting in line for their only chance of protection from this deadly virus. We can and should be doing more to help our fellow humans around the world. Biden promised to help vaccinate the world, and I believed him. But the $5 billion he requested from Congress will not get the job done. We need adequate funding to ensure that shots actually get into arms, and it's going to take $17 billion. We needed that money and those vaccines last year. My dad would still be alive if we got it. But now this week is our chance at getting those funds in time to vaccinate the world this year. Congress needs to meet and exceed Biden's request and fulfill the full $17 billion that is required for global vaccination. How many more daughters will have to lose their fathers as they wait? Thank you so much for the time and space, and thank you all today for listening. Our stories are hard, but we deserve to be heard.
Thank you for sharing, Jeanette. Your story reminds me of so many reasons why we have to continue fighting. Coming from another person who lost her dad, a daddy's girl, it is hard, and people don't understand. It is a lot of trauma, but thank you so much for telling that story. Next, we're going to hear from Amanda Finley, who, like many others, actually contracted COVID-19 and was sick. After surviving her fight with COVID-19, she's been left dealing with long-term symptoms and negative health effects.
Thank you so much for inviting me to be here today, and all of you. Thank you for coming together and for working together. Let's get things done. This is, I'm so proud of all of you. And everyone who's here listening today, we appreciate you. We need you. So my story, my name is Amanda Finley. I started out, when I was little, I wanted to be an archaeologist. I had this really great school program, but I didn't know what flavor of archaeology. So like any normal person would do, I decided to be a professional opera singer for 10 years. And then I found my flavor in Southeast Asia. So I did archaeology for 14 years. But it hasn't been terribly busy in archaeology for a bit. So I just picked up gig jobs, delivery jobs, and this is what kind of landed me in so much trouble when COVID hit. Now, my background, my degree is in anthropology. Part of it is medical anthropology and epidemiology. So when I started hearing news stories coming out of Wuhan, it caught my attention. And it really caught my attention. I have a friend who's from a small farming village in Hubei province near Wuhan. And I thought, oh my God, I have written 45-page papers about things like this. This has happened. Oh my God, this is actually happening right now. And I never thought it would hit me so soon, but I got sick on March 6th. And for the first few days, I thought, oh, no big deal. I have asthma. I haven't had bronchitis in a while, so I'm due. And then it got worse and worse. And I realized, oh my God, I think this is what that is. I was scared. I was so scared, but I didn't have insurance because I was a gig worker, and there are millions of people stuck in the gig economy. It's certainly not for lack of trying. I looked for 10 years for a real job, and it just didn't happen. So here I was stuck with this thing that was going to kill me. I have a wonderful doctor, but he was out of the office that day, a few days in, after I realized I need help now. And I didn't have $100 to pay to see him, just out of pocket. So I called a community clinic and I said, hey, I think this is what's going on. I really need help. And they said, oh, just walk in. And I said, no, that's a very terrible idea. We need to figure something out. But I was so sick. They want to know, no, just walk in. So I walked into a very full waiting room. Oh my God, there must have been 40 or 50 people in there. I had to ask for a mask because no one, just wasn't on our radar. And I don't know how many people I infected that day. And wow, it still hurts. The doctor decided, oh, well, we're not going to test you because you didn't go to China. It didn't matter. We didn't have tests in Kansas City for another 3 weeks. And I didn't qualify because I didn't have that very specific list. My temperature never got over 100.4. She sent me to another facility, a larger one with a lot more people, to get a chest x-ray that showed bilateral ground glass opacities. And at that point, I was scared. There really wasn't much we could do. They were saying, don't use steroids. Oh my God, I have never gotten through something like this without, how am I gonna do this? I am gonna die. My neighbor downstairs was elderly. He had COPD. And I knew if I spread this to him, it's gonna kill him. I don't know if I'm gonna survive this, but I'm not giving it to him. So when I got back home, I closed the door to my apartment, and it stayed closed for 4 months. I knew, number one, I didn't know when I would stop being contagious, and I sure wasn't gonna find out the hard way. But number two, my lungs were so trashed. I knew I couldn't get sick with anything else on top of it. And it was, even though I ended up losing my home, I wasn't able to work because if you're in the gig economy, if you don't work, you don't eat, you lose your home. But it was worth one life downstairs. And it bothers me a lot when people when they choose not to do 14 days. But there are people who don't have that option. We need to enable them in some way, shape, or form to do the right thing, because that's how we stop this. It starts with isolation and staying away. We can talk masks and vaccines, which are very important. Right now, we need everything. We throw everything at the wall. But if we're not enabling people to stay home and isolate, it's not enough. But because of the asthma, I just thought, oh, no big deal. I wasn't better after a month and 2 months. I thought it was just me. And I'd lost my hair after I had my son, and I went on a quest for answers for 1.5 years. I never found any, so I just assumed I'm a medical weirdo. Here we go. I don't want to go through that again. There aren't going to be answers. Then I heard about one other person, then another. So I thought, let's start a Facebook group. We'll just find like 50 of us, and we'll never have any answers. Yes, we'll be miserable together. Wow, there are over 14,000 people in my group alone. There are hundreds of groups out there. We just didn't get better. We're called COVID long haulers now, or long COVID. And for the first year, it was, hey, Facebook group, we fumbled around, but we did a few things right, and we got some scientists, researchers in the group, we got doctors, all kinds of good people, but we made a list. It started out with, okay, hey, what are your symptoms, everyone? Oh, it's a lot more than that the list of 10 symptoms that the CDC is saying. And I got a job working as a contact tracer with the Kansas City Health Department. So they flashed that list up on the screen. I was like, 10 symptoms, hold my corn. This is hilarious. We've got over 200. And over time, we just added to it. We don't know the correlation or causation, but add to that list. Write everything down. This is important. Every piece of this puzzle matters. And if we're missing a puzzle piece, we don't have the whole picture. But we just sort of fumbled around. And then toward the end of the year, oh my God, I never thought we would have vaccines that soon. I had really resigned myself to staying home, just being an indoor cat until we had vaccines. That's what it was going to take. I was okay with that. I was prepared mentally for that. Let's do it. But we had them in less than a year. Oh my God. Bless you, science, and all the research that went into this over the years. But we had a problem. The 12,000 people at the time who were in my group, we didn't know. Is this going to make us sicker? How's it going to affect us? I don't know. And they're looking to me for answers. I don't know. But I will not ask anyone else to go find out for me. I'll do it myself. Oh my God. I wasn't expecting that, but I had symptom improvement. And soon everything just exploded in the group. I was on CNN International, live with Michael Holmes in my bed, with my laptop propped up on 2 boxes of Legos. I was living with a friend at that time. They took me in. By that point, I'd had COVID twice before the vaccines. It was god awful. It was scary. But as the year turned, my good friend Chris Kocher, he asked, what's your word for the year? And I said, force. He said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, not the force. That would be very cool, Star Wars style. No, a force. Wow, that's what manifested. It was interesting. But we learned over time with the group, we need help. We can't work. We are so sick, we can't work. And it was a mad dash behind the screen. Hey, here, go. You need groceries here. Everyone send $1, $5. She needs groceries. Oh God, you need an inhaler. You need to breathe. Breathing is good. There's no help for us. Absolutely nothing. And we had a $1.15 billion bill that passed for research through the National Institutes for Health. We have to be alive to contribute to that. And we had one person in the group who he didn't make it. He was in Texas. He couldn't afford his medications. And on September 4th, he died after being sick for over a year. We fought for him $5 at a time for a year, and it was the most gut-wrenching thing I've ever been through. I've never lost anyone that horrifically, and I'm so angry. I didn't be around anyone. I was homeless anyhow, and I was tired of people giving me COVID, so I took to the woods. I went to my happy place at State Park north of Kansas City, and I was yelling at the wild turkeys in the trees. And at this point, it coincided with an article in The Atlantic by Ed Yong. Everybody was looking at me as I was falling apart. And I did not care. I blasted out not just a little Twitter comment. No, I did video comments. Over 700 of them, God knows. I would not change a thing. People started listening. I never thought anyone would hear, but they were listening. Oh dear God. I caught the attention of someone I've long admired. She posted in August, September about National Alopecia Awareness Month. And I responded, yes, Queen, when you are on a dating app and you've got alopecia, weeds out all the bad characters. And you're left with genuinely good people. High five, Ayanna Presley. And she followed me. I was like, wow, I'm a tiny little drop in the middle of the woods yelling at wild turkeys. She just followed me. Wow. And a week later, her aide did. And I was like, oh, we are legit going to talk. Wow, this is amazing. But what started happening after that? Okay, now what started happening after that, things exploded again. I went one by one across all of Twitter. We got in DMs of everyone, currently a legislator, everyone running. I said, what do you know about long COVID? I would send just that in a passage, an article. But we have an opportunity to do something called systemic change. Do it on a global level. We just got one of our long haulers out of Ukraine. Oh my God. And when she gets here, she won't have medical care. So I told the right people, she was just going to stay right there in her apartment. She taped up the windows and said, I'll take the Russian tanks over your healthcare system, because she knows she can't afford it. But we got her out. So, but I want you to know that the world is suffering. This is a global effort. Unless we are all on the same page with vaccines, with support to stay home, this is going to keep perpetuating. And I'm really tired of getting sick. I'm tired of the brain damage. I'm tired of the heart damage. I have 16 dead friends. I don't want to. But you were there in DC to represent us, to listen to us. Please do so. We don't want the talk. We want the listen in action. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amanda, for sharing that and being a fighter and continued advocate for COVID long haulers. And I'm glad to be working beside you. Next, we'll hear from Giovanna Braganza, a R2HT member and a public health policy researcher from New York City, whose father was an essential worker at the first U.S. epicenter of the pandemic.
Thank you, Erica, and thank you to everyone that spoke before me. All of our stories are really, it's an unforgiving commonplace to have to go through so much trauma, and I really commend you for the strength that all of you have had in putting purpose to this and really preventing this from happening all over the world. So today I want to share with you all about how 2 years ago in March of 2020, my amazing father, Clifford Braganza, contracted COVID-19 while working as an essential employee in New York City. While the rest of the world at this point was shutting down, he was putting his boots on and picked up extra shifts to keep up with the mounting demand for household items and food that resulted from panic buying. His job was to stock shelves at Target, and being who he was, he happily picked up those shifts to support our family. My father immigrated to this country in the 1980s from Goa, India, and worked primarily alongside other immigrants. These were people that just didn't have the luxury of working from home or staying home when they were sick. My dad didn't know how to advocate for protections like masks and extra sick time. He was so close to retiring. My family, myself included, begged him not to go into work, but he felt a calling to help others put food on their table, and quite frankly, just didn't want to lose his job. For the first week, he refused to believe that he was sick. To him, he was only 63 years old, healthy, living in what he thought was one of the most well-resourced countries in the world. I spent hours calling around to different clinics at this point to try and get him a COVID test. This was early in the pandemic when testing was very limited, so finding an appointment was almost impossible. When I finally was able to get one for him a few days later, it was too late. We arrived at the testing site, and although he was well appearing, his oxygen saturation was drastically low. The last memory I have of my father was seeing him smile and wave from the stretcher as he was wheeled into the ambulance. Even though he was only 4 miles away from me, I wasn't allowed to visit him in the hospital since I also had COVID. And that hospital was a war zone. We didn't know if he was dead or alive. His phone had died. My brother and I drove to the parking lot, stood on the hood of the car, and desperately hoped to see him through one of the tiny windows. When we didn't, it hit me that, I might never see him again or hear his legendary laugh again. My dad was an optimist. He taught me to believe in the best outcomes. So when talking to him on the phone in one of his last days, his voice was unrecognizable. That optimism was gone. He was so consumed by fear and isolation that on the fourth night, he was so weak, he fell out of his hospital bed. And when trying to roll over, his oxygen mask slipped off and he was unable to get back up. I received a call at 4 a.m. to let us know that he'd been intubated. and my heart sank. At that moment, it became very real to me that my father was going to die. And 3 days later, on April 13th of 2020, I got the call that still haunts me to this day. They sent him to the funeral home 2 weeks later in a cardboard box, which we weren't allowed to open. And for someone that was so loved, he didn't deserve to be discarded that way. Like just a number in the millions of people in this bucket. After my father died, it became increasingly clear to me that he didn't just die because where we were located, but because of who he was as an essential blue-collar worker of color. And what separated those that lived versus those that died? The answer is always money. Why did my dad die alone at a community hospital after being given hydroxychloroquine, while patients at select private hospitals were offered the expensive remdesivir clinical trial? And now we're seeing this wealth disparity playing out again on a global scale. There are billions of people around the global south who are still waiting on, getting a first COVID vaccine. As they wait, the virus continues to devastate their unvaccinated communities and mutate into deadlier variants. This is a clear and recognizable pattern, so we really can't afford to wait any longer. Congress needs to approve the $17 billion this week to ensure that we can meet the global promise of vaccinating the world by September. 2 years have already gone by and 6 million people are dead. This is so far from normal. My father died senselessly because of a lack of care of what's going on in another part of the world. That's the root of this tragedy. A global pandemic is just that. It's global. It affects everyone, everywhere, and is only preventable when we invest in building resilient healthcare systems and targeting zoonotic diseases at the source. My father loved this country so much, but our government did nothing for him in his time of need. And we have the power to change this narrative with the lessons we've learned over the past 2 years. So why don't we?
My heart breaks for you, Giovanna. I'm so sorry you had to lose your father so young. I like all of us, all loved ones, all died preventable deaths, and our grief over their loss is coupled with anger at our leaders who could have done more, and they just didn't. They turned their backs on us. Next up, I would like to introduce Christian Kiza. Christian was working as an organizer against climate change when her parents contracted COVID-19 in 2020. Her dad, a previously healthy man, died on June 30th. Christian used her anger and her grief to launch Marked by COVID to honor her father and hold then President Trump and Arizona Governor Doug Ducey accountable for his death. Thank you for being here to share your story, Christian.
Thanks, Erica, for having me, and to all the other storytellers that have shared their stories up into this moment. As I was sitting here and listening, I was reflecting upon what we're doing right now. We're bearing witness to our truths and the pain that was forced upon us by egregious policy failure from the local level to the national and global level. And we are choosing to share that in order to change the world. It is not easy for us to relive what our loved ones went through. Every single day it haunts us. But we have chosen to do this because it's the right thing to do, and we do not want anybody else to have to go through what we went through. It's that simple. And what this pandemic has shown us is that the systems that we live in are inadequate, that they do not prioritize the lives of regular folks, which is most of us. While our loved ones died, billionaires got richer. While our loved ones were suffering and not getting access to the medications that they needed, people who denied the fact that COVID existed got concierge treatment and the latest drug trials. This is not the country my father, who died, raised me to believe I lived in. And this is not the global world that we have been taught prioritizes humanity, life, freedom, opportunity. The opportunity for life was taken away from our loved ones and millions of other people across the world. And that does not even recognize the massive amount of people who are now permanently disabled due to having a COVID infection and are living with ongoing COVID symptoms, long COVID, etc. As Erica mentioned before coming into this universe, I was an advocate for a nonprofit organization, which I had worked for about 20 years. And I share that because the work that we were doing was working to stop deforestation with a primary focus of preventing the worst impacts of climate change. Massive trees are incredibly important. They're the lungs of our planet. They also hold in tons of carbon. However, the way in which we produce food, meat in this global economy creates a supply chain that basically raises tropical forests and the indigenous communities that live in it. This is a problem for climate change, but it also creates the conditions in which epidemics can thrive, outbreaks can thrive. And then those viruses and bacteria can spread to local communities and beyond. So I knew about the risks of our systems way before I was ever brought into this universe. And I found it incredibly disgusting that my father was one of the early people to die, even though I had been working for my entire career to prevent pandemics in the first place. But there wasn't a question in my mind that my dad was in danger. He was first generation. He lived in a low income community. And he also was an essential worker. So he had more exposure to begin with in the first place. That's because the system is set up so that there are the haves and the have-nots. And my dad was a have-not. But to me, he was and is irreplaceable. That's the truth for every single one of our loved ones, as well as each and every one of us on this call today. Our lives are worthy. So that's why we need to not only prevent pandemics of the future and vaccinate the world, we need to stop building systems that create two Americas. And that's why we need a pandemic prevention fund that really focuses on ending that spillover from forests to local communities and then down the supply chain line to our loved ones. It's an important investment, not just for our future, but it's an important investment for today. So I'm calling on Congress to step up to the plate, to take some of the burden off of our doctors, off of our grieving families, and off of people living with long COVID, and do your job. Put the money where the money needs to be now. Thank you.
That was a very powerful story. I just want to thank all of the speakers. I mean, everybody here. It took a lot of courage to get up, to relive your story and tell your truths. But I honestly think it needs to be heard in order for us to get the help that we need, so we can honor our loved ones by doing that. So again, I want to give a huge thank you for you all for sharing your stories. Just like many of the speakers here today, I actually lost my father as well to COVID early on in the pandemic. My dad died April the 7th, 2020, a week before his 76th birthday. Just like everybody here, my dad loved life. He loved teaching. He was a teacher in Clayton County, Georgia. He's one of the first Black teachers to teach at all white school in '67. And actually did not realize 2 years ago on March the 8th would be the last time I would see my father because he became ill. And like everybody else here, most of our people, I think, passed in the early pandemic when we really didn't know what was going on. And actually, all our loved ones' lives could have been prevented. I really feel my dad did not have to die. It could have been prevented. And I think the thing that hurt the most was going to the hospital and not even being able to see my father, not even being able to hug him, not be able to tell him I love him. And I think the worst thing was at the time, we had to stay 6 feet apart from each other. Me and my sisters, my husband, my kids, we couldn't even comfort each other. You know, my dad was in my life for 43 years, and he was always there for me. And now that he's gone, I feel that I let him down when he needed me the most. And in honoring my father, after his 3.5 weeks fought battle on a ventilator, I'm honoring my father and the 6 million other people whose lives have been taken by this pandemic that never should have happened in the first place. I want to urge Congress to do its job and deliver on the promises our government has made to the American people. We urgently need $17 billion for global vaccinations, plus the full $1.1 billion in seed funding for a multilateral global pandemic prevention fund. I want you to, everybody on this call today, I just want you to close your eyes and think of how many individuals can be helped when it comes to getting vaccines distributed in marginalized communities around the world. Imagine getting the proper medical, mental health care for everyone dealing with long-term effects caused by COVID. Imagine trusted public health workers from our communities and in our communities organizing to reverse racial health disparities and environmental racism. We must not forget this pandemic should have never happened in the first place. So I really want us to imagine that just as bad, or probably even worse, another pandemic can hit us again in the next 10 years. That is what's going to happen if we don't win now. Pandemics are coming faster and they're getting worse. Now, I would like you to look back and imagine that we look back on these terrible times and know that we did everything we could to protect everyone in the world from another COVID situation happening. We can fix the deadly mistakes that took the lives of all our loved ones. These are the causes I know in my heart my dad will be fighting for. Now I'm his voice, and it falls upon me to continue his legacy, to make that difference and make sure that our government doesn't turn our back on us again. If anyone has any questions about how to get involved, you can put them in the chat. If you want to learn more about Right to Health Action and some of the other organizations, we'll put their information in the chat. And also, please do not hesitate to reach out to us. And I just want to thank everyone for being here with us today for this event. We look forward to continuing to work together as a coalition. Please visit our website and follow us on social media for updates on upcoming events and opportunities for action. We're actually hosting a congressional call-in day tomorrow where we will flood the phone lines of Congress with our demands. And again, I want to thank all our speakers for the courage to tell your stories. I know it was not easy. I actually was trying not to cry myself, but I just want the world to know that our loved ones were people, they were human beings, and just think about the great things they could have kept doing for their communities if they weren't taken when they didn't have to be taken by this deadly virus. Thank you, everybody.